There are many myths that contribute to the stigma associated with mental illness and thereby create barriers for people getting the help they need and deserve. Join us as we do some myth busting next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. People have all kinds of widely held but nonetheless false beliefs about mental health, mental illness, and the treatment of mental illness. Now, I know this because I hear them nearly every day, but this isn't just a problem for me, a kind of Dr. Phelps pet peeve. This is a problem for you too. Why? Because widely held beliefs about mental illness that are false but nonetheless held up as facts, also known as myths, are often stigmatizing, make people feel bad, and prevent people from getting the help they need. And let's face it, 1 in 4 of us is going to have a problem with mental illness, so really, it affects all of us. So tonight, my panel of expert guests and I will be doing some myth busting, and we're going to do this as a sort of Dr. Phelps version of Letterman's Top 10, which means you get to sit back and relax and step away from the phone, because we're not going to take calls tonight. We will, however, have an assignment for you at the end of the show. Now, on to our guests. Sabrina Matheny is a therapist and the program manager for child trauma and child therapeutic support services at the Human Development Center. And Dr. Dan Diallard is a licensed clinical psychologist with the Duluth Psychological Clinic who conducts psychological evaluations and provides therapy to both children and adults. Thanks to both of you for being here tonight. Now, we have a lot of myths that we're going to try to get through in our sort of Dr. Letterman kind of way. So here we go with myth number 1, a little myth that I call, it's just a phase. So, myth, can children develop mental health problems?
They most certainly can, and sometimes it goes for a while without people noticing because there is that myth about it's just a phase. And certainly as kids, grow up, they do go through quote-unquote phases. But mental health problems, which are probably a combination of, genetics and experiences and many different factors, can certainly appear in youth, and sometimes they happen for a period of time and they outgrow them. But one of the differences between a phase and a child experiencing mental health issues, children experiencing mental health issues, it may not kind of go away for a while, or it starts to really change their functioning and interfere with things that they may be doing, school, friends, things like that.
So this is one of those things where there's a little bit of truth that some things can be a phase, but we also know that kids can develop almost every mental health problem that exists in our big manual of mental health illnesses.
Indeed. Yeah, phase to me implies brevity, and as Sabrina said, time will sort of take care of it. And a phase tends to be minimally impairing. So if your child has any of the opposite of those things, it's lengthy and it's quite impairing, and time isn't addressing it, then it's time to ask whether there's a mental health difficulty here that can be treated. I think this myth got developed in part because we tended through the years to underestimate children's suffering and think that children don't feel the way we do or don't suffer the way we do, in part because we thought it required a mature mind to really have mental health difficulties. There's a pile of evidence now to contradict that, and so this myth is slowly getting eroded, thankfully.
And I think that I'm always happy if I see a child and then say, like, I don't think your child does have a mental health issue. Right. So if you're concerned, we'll tell you. We want to see them.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite things is to be able to tell parents is that your child has an acute case of nothing at all, right?
Exactly.
Yep. Yes. All right, so now, myth number 2. Let's say that your child has a mental health problem, which we've already established that they can have mental health problems. So myth number 2 is when kids have mental health problems, it's the mother's fault.
Oh boy.
Dan.
Yeah. Well.
Because that's what we used to hear a lot.
Indeed. And some mental health disciplines such as psychiatry and psychology contributed to this myth. We had some misguided ideas in the 20th century that parents, particularly mothers who did most of the caregiving, were primarily responsible for difficult things like schizophrenia or autism. So we in the field have perpetuated this idea. The kernel of truth in this myth is that our relationships count enormously in our mental health and in our mental illness. And our primary relationships count a great deal too. So the quality of parent-child relationship matters in mental health and mental illness. But there is rarely a direct line between this person's behavior and this person's mental health problems, in the absence of things like violence or abuse. So in general, that sort of this person caused this mental health problem is false, and specifically this mother blaming is far outdated.
Yeah, and I think we kind of want to apologize to the mothers of the world out there, because we used to do things like even refer to the schizophrenogenic mother as a person who was deliberately at fault and caused schizophrenia in a child, which we know is not true.
Right, and when we look at parenting, there's also a kid temperament parenting style match. And so, we'll have kids who grow up in the same house, close in age, with the same parents, and one may have a mental health difficulty or have more, kind of challenges that just the parents have a harder time managing than the other, and they have the same rules, the same environment, but it really also speaks to that individuality, not just it's the capacity of one caregiver.
And I know that I see a lot, I specialize in treating people with eating disorders, and parents come in, moms in particular, often feeling, already feeling this must be my fault, or there must have been something that I did, feeling very blameworthy. And that can make it really hard for people to come in and get help. And we want to send a clear message about not your fault.
Indeed. This show so often addresses the stigma for folks who suffer from mental health problems. The stigma of parents who have children who suffer from mental health is often just as real. That's a very nice example. I bet that happens a lot in eating disorders.
Yep. So, so parents, we're not going to blame you. If you're seeing a treatment provider who is blaming you or where you feel blamed, maybe you want to find somebody who can be a little bit more understanding and see things from a more broad perspective then.
Yeah, and I think help you talk about any concerns you have about, parenting, but also help you figure out are the things that you could be doing to be more helpful. That doesn't mean that you were responsible for the cause.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. And often families develop interactional patterns which become unhelpful in the midst of trying to be helpful. So, but that's not the same as causing the problem. Okay, on to myth number 3. Myth number 3, mental illness is a sign of weakness. This is the snap out of it myth. So this reminds me of Cher in Moonlighting when she just said, to the love of her life, you need to snap out of it. So what do we know, Dan, about just a sign of weakness?
Absolutely not. So we understand in lots of areas of life that willpower or self-discipline can make a vital difference in how we handle adversity. Mental health problems are sometimes a bit responsive to willpower and self-discipline, but rarely is that the full answer. As part of a full treatment suite of medicines and therapy and looking at your activities of daily living, etc., selectively greater willpower can be helpful. But to say that you're suffering because you're inadequately disciplining yourself in some area is to continue that stigmatization, to overestimate the power of willpower, and to underestimate some of the factors that Sabrina talked about earlier, genetics, the importance of relationships, etc.
And what would you like to add to that?
Well, I think that if it was a matter of willpower, no one wants to suffer, right? No one wants to be in pain, and no one wants to have their life negatively impacted by mental illness. And so if it was a snap out of it, people really would. I really think that there are a number of people who they would, and they couldn't. And truly some of the strongest people I know are some of the people who suffer with mental health issues the most deeply.
I think that is a wonderful point, which is what you're really highlighting here is the level of suffering that people have when they're experiencing psychological problems. And so why would anybody want to live with that? You would do anything. And we also see a lot of people with mental health problems who show really strong willpower in other areas in which their mental illness is not affecting. And so it's like, well, we see that they have the ability to have willpower. That's not it.
Absolutely, and that they, they may be remarkably successful in different areas of their life and work really hard, and there is that mental illness creates the, like, I just can't get over the hump, and it's like I can't even see necessarily what's standing in my way to even solve the problem or have willpower about.
And we know that some mental illnesses, Dan, have a real strong biological and brain component to it, that you're not going to will your way out of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder.
Indeed. I think the 12-step traditions have something to teach us here. One of the steps talks about our powerlessness over alcohol, for example. Mental health problems are not addictions, but there's a similar inadequacy of willpower to address many problems, especially those that are strongly genetically determined.
Okay, on to myth number 4 now. People with mental illness are violent and unpredictable. Sabrina, truth or fact?
This is definitely a myth, and I think it's a myth that we certainly hear a lot about when, there are some of the national tragedies that we've had. And it's one of those things, I think it's developed because maybe it helps us feel safer. I don't really know, but that, people who have mental illnesses are not necessarily violent. They certainly do not commit the majority of crimes in our country. And it's one of the things that I think the media perpetuates when, there is a mass shooting or there's a significant event, that the media always looks to, was there a mental illness? And, that just isn't what drives a lot of the violence.
And so that really truly is the case of, even if a particular perpetrator of a heinous or violent act had a mental illness, it really is this gross generalization, as if that person is the ambassador and representative of all people with mental illness, when there really are, that person is an outlier from the group, not the ambassador to the group.
It alarms me when we identify a person who has perpetrated violence as suffering from X mental health condition, because inevitably we will hear that mental health condition caused the act of violence. Sabrina alluded earlier to this interplay of various factors. The vast majority of people who suffer from even the most disabling mental health conditions are not violent. If they are violent, other factors contribute, and we often lose sight of that when we over-focus on mental health factors. It makes sense that we want to understand a person's state of mind when they committed a violent act. I get that. But I think we're quick to leap to, this is a person not like us. We wouldn't do that. This person's an outlier.
Right. And I think Dan's point about that the mental illness is somehow responsible for it, we never say the person had high blood pressure, and because they had high blood pressure, they fired a gun in a crowd.
I think that's an excellent point, is that too, right, is that if you have a physical illness, you're sort of off the hook in perpetrating these physical crimes, right? But holding up the mental illness as being the causative factor. And frankly, we also know that the rates of schizophrenia are the same in Australia as they are here. The gun laws are different. I will say this freely. The gun laws are different here than they are in Australia. And Australia still has sport shooting, still has hunting, but they do not have the mass murder rate that we have in this country, even though they have the same rate of mental illness.
Right. I think the other thing that supports this myth is we have a lot of people who are incarcerated who do have mental health issues, but that doesn't mean they commit crimes at higher rates. Some of their mental health issues then make it difficult for them to do the things they need to do to then function in society well.
Yep. Okay. Excellent discussion on this point, troops. Now, on to our next myth. You can tell if somebody has a mental illness just by how they look. Sabrina.
Absolutely not. There's really no way of knowing that. In the same way, we just referred to high blood pressure. In the same way, there's really no way of knowing. And that, 1 in 4 people are likely to, for example, 1 in 4 adults at some point are likely to suffer from a depressive disorder. And yet, we don't walk around trying to find who they are, and they are among us.
Dan.
This myth adheres in our language in surprising ways. We talk of a fiery redhead. We talk of a ditzy blonde. We think somehow that your looks convey character or convey a particular symptom of mental health. And we sort of know this rationally, but the idea lingers in the background of our thinking and shows up in alarming ways. That person looks unstable. How many times have you heard something like that? It's the sort of thinking we do best to purge.
And I think that if we take a look at what is the kernel of truth that might be within the myth, is that there are some people with untreated schizophrenia who hear voices, and because they're hearing voices, are responding to voices. So you may see people who are talking to themselves and they look like they're engrossed in a conversation because they don't make eye contact with other people. And so that might be an example where you might have the thought of that person might have an illness that you can see visibly based on their behavior, but that doesn't mean that we can just spot. In fact, often what we talk about is sort of mental illness being an invisible illness in that way.
Absolutely. It does speak to the invisibility of it, and part of what maintains the stigma is that you can't see it, and so people can suffer in silence and can suffer without other people knowing, because you can't tell by looking at them, so you don't know.
And that they have the ability to hide that easily as well, right? That we almost, in some ways, we wish they didn't have the ability to hide that easily, because then people like us would reach out to them and say, like, "May I help you?"
Right, we wouldn't have offices. We would be wandering the streets saying, "Hey, I can help you."
Right, I can tell that you have a mental illness. You need to come with me. So, and we don't do that because we can't do that. Okay, next myth, please. If you talk to someone about suicide who is suicidal, they're more likely to kill themselves. Dan.
I'm so glad this is included on our list. The exact opposite is true. Suicidal thinking tends to narrow one's thinking, tends to make options invisible. Conversation about suicide reminds people of options, reminds people of reasons to be hopeful, reminds people of a reason to postpone something drastic like a suicidal effort until tomorrow. So we will not plant a seed of suicide in someone who's not inclined that way. We have a good chance of being helpful if we take the risk of having the conversation. This is a literally deadly myth that we feel paralyzed, afraid of making a misstep, etc. Feel as though we can't broach a topic when we know someone is despairing so much as to consider it. We ought to aggressively initiate conversations with people who are suffering this much.
Absolutely, and it is the importance of making the unspeakable speakable. And part of the world narrowing, when people are starting to think about those drastic measures, is often a sense of, I'm alone and nobody cares. And when we don't ask the topic, what we support unwittingly, perhaps in our fear, is people's then belief that they are alone and nobody cares.
And I like what you said, Dan, about how this really is a deadly myth. And simultaneously, when people don't know better, they feel that speaking is the deadly option, right? Like, oh my gosh, the stakes are so high, I can't say the wrong thing, because if I say the wrong thing, then I will be responsible for this person's life or this person's death.
Not just on this topic, but on so many, I think we overrate the need to say the right thing. As Sabrina alluded to, diminishing a person's sense of isolation and loneliness is what's accomplished by just initiating it. Even saying all the wrong things can still be helpful.
Right. Yeah. And we don't, with suicide and with many other things, we don't put ideas in people's brains that they haven't often thought of themselves, especially when they're at such a desperate place.
And that idea that talking gives the person permission then to begin talking about what their worst fears are, or their worst thoughts, what their worst thoughts are. And a lot of times, like you said, with people are kind of hiding, and they're able to hide, often need permission to talk about their deepest, darkest thoughts and feelings.
People suffering from suicidal thoughts are often very hard on themselves, and they can be hard on themselves for the fact, additionally, that they're thinking about suicide. So talking about it normalizes it some, makes it a little bit more okay, and breaks down another barrier to making a different choice.
And gives us an opportunity to help people to be safe in whatever that might mean for that particular individual. Okay, next myth, please. Most people with mental health problems need to be hospitalized. Sabrina.
I think this is absolutely one of those myths that prevents people from getting treatment and frequently prevents people from talking about what they're struggling with, because their fear is, if I say it, then I'll have to be hospitalized. And hospitalization is really one of those last resorts, and it is truly about keeping people safe, keeping themselves safe, keeping other people safe, but it's truly kind of that last resort that's really about safety and stabilization, and how do we help you kind of get back out into the world
as quickly as
possible, but in a better place.
And I think sometimes that part of where this myth comes from is if we take a look at movies and how mental illness is portrayed in movies, it's almost always portrayed with either somebody in the hospital or somebody coming out of the hospital or somebody going into the hospital. There was just something on NPR this past week talking about the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest again, and what a portrayal that was of mental health hospitalization. And so we don't believe that all people are going to be hospitalized, and once hospitalized, so we'll go maybe to the next sort of corollary myth, is it like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? Dan?
Thankfully, no. A few Nurse Ratchets, and the treatment often isn't like it's portrayed in that movie. As Sabrina said, hospitalizations tend to be primarily today about safety for oneself and other people. And the treatment is often brief and effective and sets people up to succeed outside of the hospital. One of the many encouraging developments within the field of mental health in the past several decades has been the effectiveness of outpatient services for people with even very debilitating mental health conditions. So much of what could only be done in a hospital in the past can now be done through outpatient services. So what needed to be done in difficult hospital conditions in the past can now be done elsewhere. And hospitals are now places of very specialized brief treatment, necessary but have a limited role. And again, often necessary and not to be stigmatized or downgraded. We often have a fear that, oh no, we're going to the hospital. In fact, it's often vital.
In the same way that we sometimes have to go into the hospital for physical health problems, we have one last myth I want to get to, and that myth is once you have a mental illness, you always are going to have a mental illness. There's no hope for recovery.
Right. And I think this is one of those myths where sometimes there may be a little bit of truth with some particular mental health issues, that some of them are far longer term, the schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, that they may be a longer term. Now active symptoms may be far less, but the vast majority of people who have mental health issues can be treated, they can recover, they can go about living a life that isn't greatly impacted by mental illness.
And so people both can recover, and even if you have a chronic mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, you can learn to manage that illness as well. And so even those people should feel hopeful. Is that right, Dan?
That's absolutely right. The idea of recovery ought to be expanded to include successful outpatient management, that for difficulties like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, some personality disorders, they can be very well managed on an outpatient basis, and it may mean something like lifelong treatment in some circumstances, but often it's not, and often that treatment is mildly intrusive and has few side effects, etc.
So we are done with our myths. We got through eight myths today, and we ended on the message of hope, which is that there is reason to hope. There is reason to feel hopeful because recovery is possible, and good management of problems is also is possible. So I think that we did a great job with the myth busting here. And I said that you were going to have an assignment. So what's your homework assignment? Well, here's what I want you to do. When you are out in your world, you are going to hear some of these myths out there. So what's your job? Your job is to speak up and say something and interject some facts so that people aren't just walking about continuing to perpetuate the myths out there. Now, you can do this even though you're a Minnesotan. You can find your voice. You can say the right thing and you can say it nicely, because all of these mental health myths are a problem, and you know what they say, we're either part of the problem or we're part of the solution, and since now you're an official Mythbuster too, you can be part of the solution. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links. And join us next week when our topics will be addictions and recovery. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching and good night.